Revelation 3174. From the 28th and the 29th of June 1944. Transformation of the being, demand for strength, will. The human being's will can bring about a complete change of his nature if he requests the strength from God and then lets his will be followed by action. For the strength is certainly at his disposal as soon as it is requested, but the human being's will must first express itself, because a change of nature can only take place in free will when the human being makes contact with God, as the giver of strength. Hence God must absolutely be acknowledged. The human being must admit his weakness to him and thus submit himself to him and humbly appeal to him for his assistance. Then the will which has turned away from God has turned towards him again, and every deed it now accomplishes will contribute to its change, for a will which has turned towards God can now no longer do anything which is contrary to God, because the strength from God underlies its activity. The connection with God is his surest protection against committing actions which are contrary to God's will. And this is why heartfelt prayer for strength must always result in spiritual progress, whereas a person without a demand for strength cannot change his nature, for he is too weak to carry out his will as soon as he arrogantly believes himself strong enough to do so. Although he will be able to carry out earthly deeds with the help of his constantly flowing life energy, these will only bring about a change in his soul, in his nature, if they consist of works of love, and this already demonstrates a will which is turned towards God and which will then also strive towards a connection with God. Thus a person who carries out unselfish works of love will also approach God affirmatively. He will be able to receive strength from God as a result of his activity of love, and the latter is then an unconscious request for strength which is at his disposal, while the conscious request, the prayer for strength, determines his thinking, willing and acting to work in love, so that this likewise signifies spiritual change. But a person can be constantly earthly active without his activity being an activity of love. Then this activity does not contribute at all to the transformation of his being because only the vitality flows to him but not the spiritual strength which transforms his being. And such a person absolutely needs prayer. He has to request this strength, which first requires his will to shape himself as it is his task on earth. This will, however, requires that the human being recognizes the meaning and purpose of his earthly life and that he believes in a being to whom he must answer. If this belief is lacking, then he will never muster the will to change his nature and request the necessary strength. Then he will live his earthly life completely unsuccessfully if he does not practice love of his own accord, which inevitably leads him towards realization, so that he will finally establish the right relationship with God after all, try to assimilate himself to him and request the necessary strength from the highest and most perfect being to do so. As soon as only the will turns towards God, God also takes care of the human being, since this is already the beginning of the being's change, whose will, turned away from God, is the cause of his embodiment on earth. But the human being can increase the strength flowing towards him to an immeasurable extent as soon as he desires it and asks for it. Then he will never lack the strength to work towards his perfection. He will be able to carry out deeds of love over and over again and thereby assimilate himself to the eternal deity, and he will always be more and more consciously in contact with God, for this is the characteristic of the strength from God, that it drives him to constant activity and leads the human being towards God, so that his spiritual development proceeds unhindered and he reaches his goal as long as he stays on earth. Amen.